Iraqi civilians killed in an American bombing raid on what U.S. officials insist was a military bunker.
It was a legitimate target, and it was struck.
This is NBC Nightly News with Tom Brokaw. Tonight, America at war.
Good evening. The Iraqis claim it was a civilian air raid shelter. American military officials say they have evidence it was an important Iraqi military bunker. Whatever it was, a lot of Iraqi civilians are dead tonight as a result of the bombing attack on the facility in a residential area of western Baghdad. We begin with news of the attack. Jeremy Bowen of the BBC reports now for NBC News.
This evening, according to rescue workers, hundreds of bodies still lie in the shelter. They say that more than 200 have been recovered. A large crowd had gathered by the time we were taken there this morning. Everyone I spoke to told the same story. They said that the shelter was used by women, children, and old men. Some bystanders said more than 1,000 of them had gone in the night before. The crowd outside seemed deeply shocked by what had happened. People told us that the British and the Americans were savages, animals, and criminals. This man said that 11 of his family were in the shelter. Another asked if this was the way to fight for Kuwait. Outside the entrance, about 8 corpses had been loaded onto a lorry. Men who said they'd left their families there the night before waited.
I don't know why do they hit children and already why I lose my wife and my children. It's not fair. Nobody says something. Something must up. They should not. I can't say anything more.
We went inside. Civil defense workers were trying to force themselves in through the heat and smoke. Some of them brought out a body. They were already exhausted, and their job, taking out bodies and searching desperately for survivors, had scarcely started. On the roof, there was a large hole where the projectile had smashed into the building. The bomb or missile went through a reinforced concrete roof at least a yard thick. The Iraqis say the attack happened at about 4 o'clock this morning. It's the worst damage by far that they've taken us to see, but they say there have been more serious attacks on civilian areas. The head of Baghdad Civil Defense Force said there were no military targets in the area. We were taken to a hospital. About 30 bodies had been laid out in the yard. Most were burnt beyond recognition. A doctor was there.
This is the most vicious and cruel attack that I have ever witnessed. And I only hope that those who are responsible for this can be forgiven by God.
There are very few survivors. One doctor said 8. Another said he wasn't expecting to admit many more. Among them a girl whose mother and 2 brothers were trapped, and a 5-year-old boy whose mother and 2 sisters hadn't been found. There were dreadful scenes outside the hospital. None of this was set up for our cameras. It was real grief and real anger. Jeremy Bowen for NBC News, Baghdad.
Although Bowen said he saw no evidence that it was a military facility at the Pentagon, a different point of view tonight. NBC's Fred Francis is there with the American military explanation of what happened and why. Fred?
Tom, Pentagon officials claim they have intercepted detailed military conversations from the Baghdad bunker to commanders in Kuwait. And they have detailed pictures which prove the building was used by senior officers.
But this is what the Pentagon released to defend its targeting. A drawing which shows the so-called Iraqi communications bunker on the southwest edge of the city, surrounded by civilian homes, a school, and a mosque.
Saddam Hussein, who lives in this city, has seen the results of a very strategic and surgical bombing campaign directed against that military infrastructure. He had to know that we knew that this was a military facility. And why he would put innocent civilians in this facility troubles me greatly, and it's something that, quite frankly, just mystifies us.
Because of the civilian neighborhood, one stealth fighter dropped 2 laser-guided 2,000-pound bombs at 4:30 in the morning. The building had been covered with 15 feet of steel-reinforced concrete. It had a camouflage roof, and its radios, deep in the basement, were protected from the electromagnetic pulse, or EMP, of a nuclear blast.
You don't EMP harden a bomb shelter ever. It's a very expensive thing to do. We do that with a lot of the communications that we have, and it costs a whole lot of money, and the only possible reason on earth to EMP harden something is to protect military communications.
The first bomb punched a hole in the roof. The second followed to explode deep inside. Military officials who watched and listened to the building by satellite for 5 days say now they believe the civilians were moved in at night.
Well, from a military point of view, nothing went wrong. From a personal point of view, I'm outraged that civilians might have been placed in harm's way. And I blame the Iraqi government and the Iraqi leadership for that.
Tom, military leaders say they will not change their strategy. Even if Iraqi civilians are used as shields, they say they will bomb any facility from which Iraqi leaders talk to troops in Kuwait. Tom?
Fred Francis, if they did intercept radio messages from that bunker, what did they learn from them?
Well, after the battle for Khafji, they overheard commanders from that bunker talking to commanders in southern Kuwait, telling them to maneuver, telling them that there was no air cover, telling them not to tell the other troops after the battle was over just how badly it went. And that's the sort of detail, rich detail, that they need to plan the ground offensive. And that's why that facility was very important.
Thank you, Fred Francis, at the Pentagon tonight.